A suspected Boko Haram suicide attack kills at least 5 at a militia checkpoint. What can be done to make African cities more secure as they face either too little or too much water? And the royal wild child and the American TV star counting down to Harry and Meghan's wedding. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Nigerian officials say a suicide bomber attacked a militia force that is fighting Boko Haram terrorists, killing 5 members of the force. Officials say a man carried out Tuesday's bombing at a checkpoint manned by the militia known as the Civilian Joint Task Force southeast of the Borno state capital, Maiduguri. Authorities say 6 other people were also wounded in the incident when the suicide bomber detonated the concealed IED as he was being searched at the checkpoint. There has been no immediate claim of responsibility. The attack comes 2 weeks after 86 people were killed in twin suicide blasts targeting a mosque and a nearby market in Mubi in neighboring Adamawa State. Elsewhere in Nigeria, officials, witnesses and relatives told Reuters that at least 100 people have been kidnapped along a road in northern Kaduna State in the past few days. The state's police commissioner, Austin Iwar, told Reuters that he would have been informed if there had been reports of such attacks, but he added that he would investigate the matter. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta signed a new law on Wednesday that outlaws the abuse of people on social media, but which critics say could be exploited to repress civil liberties. Media practitioners and rights activists warn the law could be used to stifle press freedoms. The law paves the way for investigations and prosecution of computer and cyber crimes, including cyber harassment and publication of false information. Violators to be penalized under the law include cyber espionage, false publications, child pornography, computer-borne forgery, cyber stalking, and cyber bullying, among others. Offenders convicted for sharing false or fictitious information and propagating hate speech will be liable to a fine of $50,000 or sentenced to 2 years in jail or both. Now, we will move on to Kenya. We stay in Kenya still, where dozens of protesters came out on Tuesday to call for an end to the discrimination of mothers who breastfeed in public. The demonstrations was sparked by a social media post by a woman who says she was harassed at a city restaurant while breastfeeding and asked by staff to cover up or nurse her baby in the bathroom. There is no law in the country that prohibits nursing a baby in public. The Breastfeeding Mother Bill passed in Kenya's parliament in 2017 obligates employers and public facilities to make provisions for mothers to nurse their children in a set-aside place that is clean, comfortable, and secure. Organizers of the protest say the incident reported at the hotel was a violation of human rights for both the mother and the child. But activists want breastfeeding to be protected by law.
Denying a woman the right to breastfeed her child is wrong. That's why I took a day off work to come here and fight for this right. I was breastfed by my mother and I'm grateful for that. She never had to do it in a toilet. We must respect the rights of women and children.
We want to say that breastfeeding mothers have a right to breastfeed anywhere they please and without feeling humiliated or shamed for doing something which comes natural. And we are also saying that we will not allow a sacred bond between a mother and a child to be sexualized.
Well, researchers say most women are unable to breastfeed for the recommended period because of their circumstances or their jobs are not accommodating them. While campaigning for Burundi's May 17th constitutional amendment referendum has ended, with both the yes and no camps holding their final rallies on Monday amid rising tensions. The referendum will decide whether to amend the constitution to extend presidential terms to 7 years from 5. One of the sections of the law in the controversial referendum vote to be amended is on presidential term limits that could see President Pierre Nkurunziza's rule extended for at least a decade. Human rights groups say they do not think the vote will take place in a free and fair climate, while there have been sporadic incidents of violence and abductions. The proposed changes would potentially extend Nkurunziza's rule to 2034.
The first thing that this government has been looking for in Burundi is legitimacy. And that is what is behind the whole problem, the whole political crisis. It's because the government is not legitimate. So the referendum is going to give it constitutional and legal legitimacy that it is looking for. Burundi has reached a tipping point with that referendum, and after that referendum, we are likely to see more opposition on the ground. We are likely to see more killings by the government, and that will just push the country further to the precipice.
Well, Burundi has been gripped by political crisis since April of that year, when Nkurunziza announced he would stand for a third term. Well, for the latest on the eve of the Burundi vote, journalist Mohamed Yusuf joins me by phone from Bujumbura. Good evening, Mohamed.
Good evening, Vincent.
Now, it's just a matter of hours before this vote is taken. Can you describe for us the political atmosphere in the country today?
Burundi today has been very quiet, calm. People are going about their daily activities. But so far, if you speak to people in the streets, they're really fearful. Maybe what tomorrow might bring. They don't know what tomorrow will be like. And as you may aware, this is the first time Burundi will be doing this kind of election referendum. So they're really going into a very different territory compared to elections that they're used to. So they really don't know what will tomorrow look like, but they hope that things will work out well.
Now, for the period you were there, to what extent would you say both sides, the no side and the yes side of this vote, have had the opportunity to sell their position to the electorate?
Yeah, for the time we were here, especially the ruling party were really able to go about their business and do their campaigns. Also, those people who are against the proposed constitutional changes also campaigning freely. But for the few that we spoke to, they were telling us from the opposition, they were saying that there were a bit of intimidations here and there, and people were too afraid to work with them, for example, helping them with transport vehicles and stuff like that. But so far, what has really been worrying in both rallies, or from both yes and no, has been that people, how they're really afraid to speak their mind and tell you why they think they should vote yes or no. There have been no much freedom. People are not free to speak their mind, even in both rallies that we visited.
And we know that there's a huge kind of crowd of Burundians who are actually outside of the country who had to run away because of the skirmishes throughout last year. Has that been part of a conversation there?
That has been part of the conversation, especially just ordinary people are able to say, look, for example, it's not the right time for us to do this because majority, looking at the environment we are, is not secure, is not safe. The majority of the people are fled. Most of the politicians, opposition are gone. So I think the time is not right. There's that conversation that is going on, which many feel that there is no worries or problem changing a constitution, but the time many feel is not right for Burundi to change that.
Okay, and you say people are not sure of what tomorrow will bring, but does the government assure people that the process will be free and fair?
Yeah, that is what they have assured in their last rally. They were also educating the people how they should vote and what to look at. They say that there will be security, but again, you never know what may happen tomorrow. But people have told us they will go and vote and decide when they get there.
Mohamed, I want to thank you very much for your reporting. Mohamed Yusuf reporting from Bujumbura in Burundi. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told his South Korean counterpart by phone on Wednesday that Washington continues to prepare for a meeting in Singapore, June the 12th, between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. Now, despite Pyongyang's criticism of the ongoing joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises and its threats to cancel the summit, VOA's Greta Van Susteren spoke with U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton about denuclearization, or rather denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula.
They want a peace treaty. They want an end to the hostilities on the Korean Peninsula. The South Koreans want the same thing. Look, we all want peace on the Korean Peninsula after all these years. And we can get to that, but to get to that, there has to be complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. That is absolutely clear.
Well, that was VOA's Greta Van Susteren speaking with U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton. We want to know what you think about Africa 54, the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, helping African cities become more resilient and water secure. Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
Deep in the desert, Israel's tourism board is advertising the draw of silence and sand, a country where 60% of it is barren. Among the 3.6 million visitors last year, just 5% of them spent time in the desert. Omar Seltzer runs the Happy Glamper company that uses a mobile catering truck.
Solar panel on the top that gives us clean energy for the whole camp.
It's got flowing water, a full kitchen, a refrigerator, USB ports too. For fun, there's trekking out here, rope climbing, llama walking, and star searching. Accommodations are spiffy with plush beds and large lounging areas under a tent. Visitor Felix Keel.
It's interested to know or to learn about it, how the people are living in this area and not in the cities and stuff like that.
Israel's tourism industry rakes in over $5 billion a year, and tourism officials think there's a lot more money in the desert. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Well, the devastation of torrential rains and flooding in northern Kenyan grasslands grabbed the headlines last week when a dam burst, sweeping away hundreds of homes and killing 20 people. Cape Town, South Africa's water crisis woke up many people up to the reality of a permanent water shortage in that region. But many other African cities in places like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Somalia face recurrent water stress, either too little water or too much of it. This water crisis have put under the spotlight the ability of Africa's major cities to deal with and actually plan for the effects of climate change. For answers to where the next water crisis will be and how African cities can become resilient and water secure, I'm joined in studio by Eric Viala. He is a water management expert from the non-profit organization Windrock International. Eric, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
So water everywhere, but sometimes not enough in some places. So after what we saw in South Africa, and then we've seen a lot of water in Kenya, those are two contrasting cases here. What would you see as the next place? Where do you think you could predict the next place where we are likely to have a water crisis situation?
Well, it's always difficult to predict where the next water crisis will happen. What's interesting is that if we look, for example, at what recently happened in Cape Town, there are a certain number of lessons learned we can draw from it, and a certain number of solutions we can promote. I think the first thing about water is that it's important to measure. You can't manage what you don't measure. In Cape Town, they did a pretty good job measuring how much water they have, who's using it, and they were able to predict the crisis and communicate about it. So I think that's the first lesson learned, is that in many African cities, there's a lot that can be done to improve their capacity to measure how much water they have, where it is, who's using it, and be ready to manage better what they have. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of looking at water sources, it's important to diversify. The issue in many African cities is that they usually have one water source. In the case of Cape Town, for example, they were basically relying on dams. And when those dams were not filled properly by the rains, then there was no plan B. In a city like Cape Town, which is a coastal city, they should have looked at groundwater and desalination, which is what they are doing now. I think these are some of the lessons learned. Another lessons learned is that at the end of the day, we are the water users. We are the ones who cause water issues because we tend to pollute, we tend to waste water, just because we have to use water for our livelihoods. And at the end of the day, that's also a solution that has to be looked into, is how you can change behaviors of water users.
In fact, if I take it up from there, changing the behavior to avoid wastage, you talked about governments measuring water. Is it also important that governments educate people about the kind of the amount of water we have, where we are getting it from, and perhaps some of the risks of running out of especially clean drinking water?
Absolutely. Changing behaviors, the first thing is to communicate and raise awareness, to provide people with better attitudes, perceptions, and also practices, how to better use water. And as I said, it's about wasting, it's about polluting. You can do that through communication, you can do that for awareness raising. Another tool is, of course, financial mechanisms, because at the end of the day, there is a well-ingrained idea that water should be for free. And that's an idea that has caused a lot of damage, because supplying water has a cost, and somebody has to pay for that. And unfortunately, we have a financial gap in terms of paying for water supply that tends to disproportionately impact poor people, especially in African cities. So at some point, there has to be a change in mentality. People have to pay for water. In the case of Cape Town and changing behaviors, Cape Town was a very good example where behaviors were changed because they increased tariffs. They fined people who were still overusing water. So again, changing behaviors.
But the behavior was kind of almost forced because of the reality of the moment. But if people want to change behaviors way earlier, which means it becomes a way of life. That requires a lot of education, right?
Yes. And definitely in that kind of crisis, the issue is always how to be proactive instead of reactive. I mean, when you have the issue, suddenly you need to do something. But with better data, again, you can look at what's happening right now, what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. Then you can plan better. You can diversify your sources. You can also diversify your solutions. For a very long time in African cities and everywhere else, the simple solution is infrastructure. You need more water, you build a dam, you build a treatment plant. That's not enough. You mentioned behavior change. That's another tool. There's also green infrastructure. We need to better manage our environment. We need to better take care of the role our environment plays in terms of protecting our water resources. A very interesting example was New York City. 20 years ago, they decided that instead of investing in more treatment because the water coming to them was getting more and more polluted from upstream farming, they decided to work with the farmers to better educate them and to change their behaviors again so that the water coming to New York City was less polluted. And that was cheaper at the end of the day than infrastructure, behavior change being cheaper.
Could government give incentives, say, to people who live in places where there's usually heavy rain for certain periods, where people could harvest this rain and perhaps store it in big tanks? But perhaps if government incentivized by giving certain perhaps concessions to water tanks or even construction of such reservoirs, can that help?
You mentioned floods. One of the things about floods is that we've always had floods. But with population growth, we have more and more people living in risky areas, in flood-prone areas where they shouldn't live. And now the question is, how can the government move those populations? Well, in many African cities, you have informal settlements and slum cities where people don't have another choice. But the problem is where the next flood comes, these are the first victims of those events. So the government has to really look into providing better accommodations for people and planning ahead, doing flood mapping exercises so that they know where the floods are going to come and which areas are risk areas. That's really the way to plan ahead and prevent victims.
Indeed, and of course to recognize how important the water is. We thank you very much for joining us today and giving us those insights, Eric. Well, that's Eric Viala, a water management expert from the non-profit organization Windrock International. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, counting down to this weekend's royal wedding in London. We'll be right back.
In Nigeria, a suicide bomber attacks a militia force that's fighting Boko Haram jihadists, killing 5 members of the force at a checkpoint in the southeast of Maiduguri. In Senegal, a student was killed and 18 police officers were injured in Saint Louis during protests with students demanding payments of their university grants they have yet to receive. In Malawi, rights groups hold meetings to discuss ongoing attacks on people with albinism, with some suggesting the death penalty should be used. In Burundi, campaigns for a May 17th constitutional referendum came to a close as human rights groups continue to voice concern over whether the vote will be free and fair. Finally, in South Africa, Bothaville hosts NAMPO 2018, one of the largest agricultural fairs in the Southern Hemisphere, and land ownership issues will be a hot topic.
Well, Britain's Prince Harry and American actress Meghan Markle are set to marry on Saturday, May 19th in Windsor, England. For many fans, it's a fairy tale romance, but as Henry Ridgwell reports from London, the marriage also breaks many of the unspoken conventions of the British royal family. Well, looks like we have a little trouble with that particular story. And so now we're going to look at, we have, what do we have? What's our next? We want to go back and try to get that story back, the royal family, the royal wedding that is about to happen in London. We just mentioned there that actress Meghan Markle is set to marry on Saturday and May 19th in Windsor, England. And we know it's a great time for everybody, but for many fans, it's also seen as a fairy tale romance. And so now let's look at that package by Henry Ridgwell from London.
A TV star and activist who has already made her mark on the world, Meghan Markle breaks the mould of the demure princess, says British royal expert Richard Fitzwilliams.
Is an American biracial divorcee who's an activist, a feminist and a former actress. Those were credentials that might well have barred her from marrying a senior member of the royal family only a relatively short time ago. Now they're being positively welcomed.
Welcomed into a British royal family that still elicits fascination around the world. Markle's activism mirrors the charitable work of her future husband.
Feels really nice.
In Rwanda and India and also the United Nations for female empowerment, she's been an activist for much of her life. This is taking the role to a new level, and she can lobby at the very top.
But that lobbying has a limit. Some fear Markle's outspoken nature may not go down well in the gilded corridors of a royal dynasty where politics is taboo.
The royal family does things quietly with dignity, and that's what we count on them for. So it's going to be very, I think, difficult for her to really curtail her activism. And we've seen a few stumbles here and there as she's been acclimating to royal life.
The couple met in 2016 and announced their engagement last November.
It's a standard, typical night for us.
It's a cozy night. It was what we were doing, just roasting chicken and having
trying to roast chicken.
Trying to roast a chicken, and it was just an amazing surprise. It was so sweet and natural and very romantic. He got on one knee.
Some dribbling, won't
For Britons, the wedding of Prince Harry will mark a particularly happy milestone.
This will be the royal wild child who has developed perhaps beyond levels that we thought he would.
The death of Princess Diana in a Paris car crash scarred a nation and deprived 2 young boys of their devoted mother. In recent years, Harry has described the mental trauma of the funeral.
It was an extraordinary experience. There's no doubt that he's had some deeply troubling times. The army has made him, and also it's very important to remember his commitment to charity.
Those twin passions have seen Prince Harry serve in Afghanistan and champion charitable causes around the world, including the Invictus Games for wounded servicemen and women.
Message? Oh, from Michelle. How very amusing. So we like to watch it together?
Yes.
Let's have a look.
Hey, Prince Harry, remember when you told us to bring it at the Invictus Games?
Careful what you wish for.
Oh, really? Please.
Boom.
Behind their transatlantic bond is plenty of compromise.
And what we're seeing is quite the change. I mean, she's brought a California lifestyle to Britain. She's slimming him down. She's putting him on shakes, eating less meat. What Brit do you know that doesn't like meat?
The royal wild child tamed by the American star. Millions will tune in for the wedding. Many more will watch with fascination in the coming years as the new royal couple make their way in the world. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. And from all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. This expression sounds like a violent way of eating, but it's actually not always about eating.
Here is your Russian book, Anna. Thanks for letting me borrow it.
Oh, are you done with level 1 already?
Yeah, I finished last week, and I've already finished level 2.
Wow, you are really sinking your teeth into learning Russian.
Well,